So I would imagine since you started that Facebook group in 2013, you, like I, have probably watched, read, and listened to thousands of these different experiences over time. Was that correct?
Yeah.
Do you have a couple that really affected you that stand out amongst all the others? If you have two or three that you would share with everybody that wowed you and why they wowed you.
I think overall, and what I love about these experiences is they're almost always learning experiences. And so a lot of people will ask about hell or is there anything I have to be afraid of, worry about? And I want to address that through several NDE's experience.
My guest today is Ned Matineia, who I met when the universe conspired to bring us together at a dinner at the IANDS conference. I learned that Ned has built an incredible near-death experience community with almost 300,000 members. And today we are going to talk about his journey from a very skeptical, scientific person who didn't feel like he had a purpose on this earth to being a powerful connector of people with near-death experiences. And he and I are going to share some of our very favorite experiences and things about near-death experiences that have touched us, moved us, and helped us to want to continue to bring this to the masses. So Ned, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm excited.
It's so good to see you. We had such a great conversation at dinner at IANDS, and I am just so intrigued. How in the world did you start this NDE group that has now reached over 275,000 members?
So ultimately, I needed a reason for being here on Earth. I didn't have a healthy or positive childhood. I had a lot of the trauma. And in fact, my speech at times is impacted. And it's interesting because as I've had mediumship readings, almost every time the information will come through from either my guides or spirits about how a lot of it is because of my father. Even if I don't ask about it or like I hardly ever think about him, it's just interesting how they have told me. And that, in a way, almost to remind myself how, I did have abuse and trauma. And almost like, if something happens to you, you often feel it's normal. And so if it's all you've ever know. And so I've had to have other people remind me, you have had trauma, you can heal this. And it's like, it has to sink in over time. So it's been a process. I used to be afraid of people. I used to have extreme social anxiety. So out of all of that, when I was in high school, when I was a kid, at times I was picked on, sometimes I had trouble speaking and whatnot, but also just I never learned how to healthily relate to other people. It took, like, I'm definitely a late bloomer, and so I'm catching up. But in that whole process, when you're a teenager and you don't have a reason to live, and you are kind of a scientist at heart, like I am, you want to analyze and understand how everything works. And so when I took biology in high school and I learned about evolution and whatnot, I thought that pretty much explained it, that we're just a random accident. And, you know, the cells and the atoms over time evolved and we're just lucky chance. And we're in a cold, vast, and dark universe. And that's how I saw everything. And I thought, like a lot of scientists, that there is no afterlife, there is no soul, there is no intuition, any of that, because there isn't any evidence for it. I thought that all religious ideas were just like fairy tales, and people want to have a comforting belief. And so it was in that whole process where I thought about, okay, well, life on Earth, it's painful, it's a struggle. It wasn't just in my life. I'm sensitive. And so when I see injustice in the world or on the news or countries who are fighting other countries, and I thought humanity was barbaric. I thought, what's the point of all this? Like, there isn't any redeeming point or quality. I didn't have anything to really look forward to, unlike a lot of other people who have relationships and friendships and goals. Like I felt like the aloneness that I felt in high school would just continue the rest of my life. And therefore, what is the whole point? I felt like homework was all busy work. I felt like there wasn't a purpose to anything because I saw like through the capitalistic or consumerist system of just, earning money and then spending money and then just all that. And so anyway, I needed a reason. I needed something that gave a purpose beyond what religion said and also the science um, because science basically said and still says we don't have a purpose. And in that whole thinking, a lot of people in power, a lot of people in power in academia, within the medical world, are incredibly intelligent and smart. However, they don't always have a strong reason to help others or to be good or kind. And something I've learned in NDEs and in mediumship is that really kindness is like the most important thing. And so, like all of our bank account, all of our money, we can't take any of that. It's just the impact we've had on the earth. And so, to answer your question, and so with that whole childhood, I was on a journey for answers because I thought I'll either find the answers or I'll just end it because I need a reason. And so I came across um, Dr. Raymond Moody's book, which is Life After Life, and he was at the conference, which was amazing. He's a psychiatrist who studies his patients who've had these near-death experiences, and he was the first one in the medical and the academic world who took it seriously. And so when his patients reported having these out-of-body experiences and traveling to other dimensions or meeting loved ones or an immense light, aka God or source, he actually started writing them out and recording them and validating them. And in his book, because of how he used the scientific rigor about it. Like he wasn't just making up stories. And sometimes the patients would have what's called veridical, which means that at the time of a clinical death or in a coma or just a patient just unconscious, and they were actually watching accurate events which were happening or listening to conversations around their body, but sometimes down the hallway or at a far distance. And after waking up, and sometimes shocking everyone up because no one expected them to survive, they actually recounted, I heard you tell this person you had a conversation about this. I watched you open the fridge. It's interesting data and evidence like that made me notice. And as a person who has a scientific mindset, I needed that. And it was all of a sudden, it was almost a reminder of like, wow, it seems like there is a higher power or a light or a being who knows everything about us and who has a sense of humor, who is so loving. And there is our loved ones who are often uh, greeting us. And oftentimes people will learn things in the future which will happen. And people are changed. It's not just a vague hallucination. Like when people come back, their aura is like opened up and they often become more sensitive to other people's thoughts or emotions or even electrical impulses affect nearby gadgets. It happens a lot. And so because of the power of all this information, um, once I learned about near-death experiences, I basically that became my passion. And so I didn't have a reason to live until that happened. And then it was like, even though I'm a software engineer and I love tech and all that, my heart and passion is in these whole topics. And then eventually I came across mediums and I had readings, which began to heal and transform in my own life. And I realized that I'm a medium. And we also, everyone has intuition, even though science, it will still tell us that intuition is impossible or it's just a make-believe idea. We all have intuition, and it's oftentimes, you know, if you can compare an analogy, logic is if you have a set of facts or ideas and you can analyze them, and you have an idea A and then there's idea B and you can follow a path. Intuition, you don't have a path. You just instantly know or receive an answer or a vision or a knowing. Because of all that, back in 2012, I came across a website for IANDS conference. And I recommend the conference to anyone who is interested in anything that is about near-death experiences, but also just about more in terms of that there is magic in life beyond the mundane. And so IANDS is the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And in 2012, after I came across the website, it talked about a conference which was over Labor Day weekend. And that year it would be in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I signed up immediately because I thought, how cool. I heard about all these experiences on YouTube and then Dr. Raymond Moody's book. And to actually meet people who've had these in person, I felt it was just an instant yes. And so I signed up. And when I was over there, I remember how hot it was. It was like 108, which isn't for Phoenix, that's average, right? I started meeting the people that I saw on YouTube in person. I remember I walked in the hotel lobby and the first person I bumped into was Ellen Dye. And so I don't know if you heard about her story, but she was in a car accident. I think this was in the 1980s or 90s, but it was a head-on accident, and she watched the other driver walk out of his car and then turn her headlights off. And she actually watched this from the sky over the whole scene, and she found it interesting. And then she ended up leaving this whole realm or dimension and ended up with her soul family in this whole different realm. And like a lot of experiencers, she actually argued to stay there because here on Earth it's hard. And she said, in comparison to in Earth, it's almost like everyone is walking through molasses, and it takes time. We have a lot of the pain and suffering here, emotional and physical. Over there, it's like the energy is heightened and intense and also really blissful. I ran into her in the hotel lobby, and then after that, it was just like every person I met, a lot of them either became friends or I had seen them. And long story short, it was that everyone I met at the conference, it was more than just an intellectual learning. It was like a family. It was like you could even call it perhaps soul family. And I wonder if a lot of us have not already known each other in other lifetimes because we've had familiarity with each other. And this is with everyone in the conferences. It's like you realize there are people who understand you without you having to explain a lot. And I find that, and a lot of experiencers will feel that a lot of people in their daily life are not always able to relate to them in terms of, it's almost like you have acquaintances and then you have people who really understand you. And a lot of people who have had these unusual experiences where society will often either label it or ignore it or just say, I'm not interested in that. It's too strange. So a lot of us, we have a hard time meeting other people who understand us. And so anyway, the conferences are amazing about that. And so that was at the end of August of 2012. And a year after that, it was in September of 2013, I was on Facebook and I just had the idea why not just start a group? And I called it Near-Death Experiences. And any articles or videos I found, I posted there. And I didn't have any plans about it or anything. I felt like I wanted to organize information and have it out there in a humble, small way. But what happened was over time, over the years, eventually it became, or it shifted out of me sharing ideas and articles into a lot of other people and experiencers were joining and asking questions and posting their own experiences. And then I became almost like more of a moderator in terms of ensuring there were no arguments or bullying or any of that. And so over time, it started out with just myself and then a few other people. And then it became 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, and then 50,000, 100,000, etc. And so now it's almost 300,000. And a lot of the people, impossible to have a perfect group at that size in terms of you always have people who are arguing with each other or whatnot. However, I always remind everyone and encourage if you see any rude behavior or comments, you can report it and we take care of it. But I feel like the reason I made it and I made it public on purpose because there are a lot of NDE groups and other related groups which are private, and I'm in a lot of them too because they have a purpose about privacy and having a safe space. But I did this because I need, or I think the world will greatly benefit and in a way even needs this information. And so like I needed this information. Otherwise, I felt like what's the point of being here? And I think a lot of people are similar because a lot of us are in the whole rat race of our work and our job, and then our rent or mortgage, and that's consuming all of our mind, and we're not reflecting on why we're here or is there anything beyond the mundane, etc. And so I want to get the word out. And it's interesting because a few decades back, these experiences were a lot more taboo in terms of people had to be quiet. Otherwise, you could end up in an institution or you could be completely blacklisted from your family, friends, etc. And now it's almost like a lot more people are willing to talk about it. And it's important because this is something that affects us all. And it isn't
It's 6:30.
a mistake how a lot of people are told that the reason that they are sent back here is because they have a purpose. And that means that there is a purpose. There is a reason that a lot of us are here. Isn't only to waste our time or to just stay in a fulfilling life. It's to actually make the most of it, but also to love each other because they all talk about how love is the answer. And especially in today's world, that message is so important.
Wow, Ned, amazing. So I would imagine since you started that Facebook group in 2013, you, like I, have probably watched, read, and listened to thousands of these different experiences over time. Was that correct?
Yeah.
Do you have a couple that really affected you that stand out amongst all the others? If you have two or three that you would share with everybody that was like wowed you and why they wowed you.
I think overall, and what I love about these experiences is they're almost always learning experiences. And so a lot of people will ask about hell or is there anything I have to be afraid of or worry about? And I want to address that through several NDE's experiences. One of them, her name is Angie Fenimore. And I saw her at the conference in, I think it was Orlando in 2016. And she talks about how, in her experience, which was caused by an attempt on her life, her own attempt on her life, it started out incredibly painful and ugly and scary. And then she reached a point in the experience where I forget how it all happened because this was a while ago, but everything changed. And this happens a lot. And it was almost like God or Jesus, I can't recall who was in her experience, but it was like a higher power showed her that all of that ugliness that she experienced, it was because she had that ugliness inside her. And after she basically released it and processed it, she realized, I don't have to hold on to that. Like all those emotions, all those anger, fear, self-loathing, we are our co-creators. And so if we are holding on to that anger towards others or ourselves or hate or spite or any of that, it's like we have auras, we have energy fields, and that is in our field. And it was just a process of her having that experience and then the light bulb of being shown I was creating all that on my own. And I don't have to hold on to that. And I have a second chance at life. And actually, like for a lot of experiencers, she was actually kicked out. She said, nope, it's not your time yet. Earth is kind of like her place, our all place to actually work out these lessons and experiences. And that's why a lot of experiencers call it Earth School. And it's almost like a university, and there are people at different levels of understanding, and we're all kind of mixed in. But yes, with her case, I love how even though it started off as a hellish experience, she actually ultimately is thankful for it. And I know a lot of others who had similar scary experiences have the same feeling afterwards of like, I needed that. It was a wake-up call. It was a good thing. It wasn't about eternal punishment or whatnot. And so another one who I've always appreciated the story. This is David Bennett, and he was a commercial diver. Have you heard of him?
I had him on my show.
Awesome, yes. And so,
I'll link his interview up here.
okay, yes, and his story is real interesting too because he was an engineer, a very pragmatic mindset. He wasn't really interested in fluff or just in nice ideas. It was just a matter of what was real and important in front of him. And so he was a diver, and in 19, I think it was in March 1980, he drowned off the coast of Ventura, California, in the ocean. And in his experience in the ocean, it was a storm, and he ended up leaving his physical body, and he went to this other realm and he met his soul family. And he talks about how beings or people felt so loving and familiar as if he had known them for since ancient times, in other lifetimes, a lot stronger compared to his earthly family. I think he was shown some lessons, his own life in terms of his own growth, and then he was eventually told he had to return to Earth because he has a purpose. And just like Ellen and just like a lot of other experiencers, he argued, he's like, no, I'm happier here. Earth is hard. He said, my body was in the ocean and it was all drowned. It's impossible to heal it. And it's almost like whenever the higher power says something, it makes it happen. He was basically sent back. And what's interesting was his arm in the ocean, it got wrapped around a bowline. And so and then what happened was the waves would actually crash into his chest and kind of help to expel water. It was a whole process of him waking up out of that. He wrote a book, and it's called Voyage of Purpose, and it's because he was told repeatedly before being sent back how, you have a purpose, you have a purpose, you have a purpose. And that message I love because I think that for all of us, we have our own purposes. And sometimes it isn't anything grandiose. It's just a matter of if you have a family or children, or if you have a passion of caring for others, or making music, or if you're an excellent engineer. We all have our talents and our gifts, and ultimately, um, what these experiences are showing us is we are to use them to help each other. And this actually gets into a topic I think about a lot, is how to apply uh, the messages or learnings in terms of, so almost everyone is talking about love. How do we actually live that more? And how come, if everyone is talking about love, why is so much division happening, on TV and whatnot? And so it's really, I think it goes into like the economics and politics, but like eventually, I wonder if we're gonna enough people awaken to shift into a healthier and more soul-based system. Our current system of our economy and economics, it's all about working hard, and some people are thriving, which is awesome, but a lot of people are struggling. And, we have a huge growing gap in between the haves and have-nots. And so I think because the whole system as a whole is not interested or even acknowledging that there is a soul, that there is compassion is the most important thing. If we talk to many world leaders or CEOs, a lot of them will laugh at that idea. A lot of them will say profit is king, and love or compassion is just a nice concept. I also used to think like that, and I think a lot of people do, until they have these experiences. And I've heard a lot of experiencers who were, let's say, extremely ruthless in business and accumulated a lot. Once they had that epiphany, they completely changed how they saw things, and what they valued, and they actually prioritized um, working with other people, helping each other, and actually making a heart-based difference in other people's lives.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I can think of two people right off the bat who I know who had accumulated some level of wealth and gave it all up because they had a near-death experience and they knew that the money wasn't the most important thing. David Cobb is the first one that comes to mind. I'll link his video because his is an incredible near-death experience that not very many people on my channel watched, and I don't get it because he was this incredible, powerful movie mogul, movie executive. He had this ability to manifest and understands manifestation, but had this experience with a tribal collective council who took him on a journey and showed him how to use natural plants to heal. And he has since made these plants from property that he owns near the Four Corners, and he sells them and has all these accolades from people that have been healed with these products, that honey is one of the ingredients, and all of these naturalistic things that we don't really use anymore, that we're not aware of anymore. And he gave all of that up to have this almost reclusive life where he would cultivate the land so that he could spiritually mature it to grow these plants to heal people. It's just an incredible story. I love that you brought that up.
I love that. And actually, it also reminds me of someone else. I'm trying to remember his name. I think it's either David Monarch or something with an M, if I find it, but I don't recall his career or his life before he had his NDE, but afterwards he was actually given almost like a task by, let's say, the higher power about preserving the ancient redwoods. And I forget how have you heard about him?
Not only, it's funny that you would bring him up. I just had a conversation with him on Saturday.
It's
David
6:34.
Milarch is one of my closest friends. David Milarch and I met because
Wow.
I was so intrigued by his near-death experience. His organization is Archangel Ancient Tree Archive. I've been training to be a tree climber to help preserve the redwoods. So his story, just in a nutshell, it's fascinating. Again, another one of the NDEs out of my 350 or so on the channel that hardly went to anybody. I released his video on Arbor Day. I couldn't wait for the world to hear it, and I just cannot believe how few people watched it. He was an alcoholic. He decided he didn't want to drink anymore, locked himself in a room, and he thought, I'll either come out completely cured of alcoholism or I'll die. And he had massive kidney failure, went to the hospital, didn't stay, and died. So dead that his mother and his wife had covered him up, that when he came back from his near-death experience, he scared the bejesus out of them when he sat up. But it wasn't the experience, which was incredible because he had this experience with Archangel Michael. It was really what happened about 6 months after that, when he was visited in the middle of the night by an angel who told him to get a notebook and meet in the living room and sit on the couch. And the angel began to dictate what he is called a manifesto. He fell asleep during the dictation, and when he woke up, he had about 7 pages of perfectly written instructions on how he was going to clone trees. And he had grown up in a nursery family where they had experience growing shade trees primarily. And this manifesto said, you are going to go and preserve the ancient trees of the world.
Wow.
And so his dad, who had a lot of experience, helped him figure out how they were going to gather and clone these ancient trees. And they were successful in cloning trees that scientists at universities had tried for years and could not solve the puzzle, and Archangel did. Since this happened about 35 years ago, David just had his 76th birthday a couple weeks ago. They have cloned about 150 of these trees, including the waterfall sequoia, which burnt in a California fire a few years ago, was the largest sequoia tree. Imagine, like, most people think of General Sherman, the sequoia tree in the Sequoia National Park. It's a huge tree if anybody has seen it. The waterfall sequoia tree was 14 feet bigger around and taller than General Sherman. And they cloned those trees. And I think it's incredible to take these massive trees that have survived all of mankind's cutting. You know, we cut and we've ruined a lot of these forests, but these ancient trees have been preserved and they've been cloned and they've been replanted everywhere, all over the UK, all over in places. As a matter of fact, they just planted a grove of sequoia trees in urban Detroit, which has gotten a lot of press. But yes,
Wow.
I'm glad you brought that. I can't believe you said that. Like, think about how many NDEs we know about, and you pulled out somebody who I'm super close to.
Well, right. And that's incredible because the fact that you talked to him only a few days ago, which is,
I talked to him on Saturday. Today is Wednesday.
yeah, I mean, perhaps it's a synchronicity because I'm curious if the universe is highlighting his story in something about nature. See, this is what I think about a lot as well, because we have, like a lot of our culture, and especially like the loggers, like a lot of them, it's a source of pride. And so I was just in Oregon, and in terms of actually cutting down old trees, a lot of them take pride in it, but yet we also have to have a sense of, well, is anything sacred? Is anything important? And I ask a lot of questions about how things work and why things are the way they are. And that's how I ended up in NDEs and mediumship, as an example. And it seems like what the angels and the higher power is encouraging is that life is precious in his NDE and a lot of others, that we're not here to just extract materials and like, because a lot of what's happening is politicians will frame it as it's either you're going to have a healthy economy or a healthy earth, and you can't have both. And it seems like the message from the other side is encouraging the healthy earth. It's almost like
Yeah,
these
look at
Native
us.
Americans.
Look at our backgrounds.
Yes. Yes, because we it's that whole Native proverb, like when the last tree is cut and the last river is polluted, you can have as much money as you want, but you won't be able to survive. The earth is, they call it Mother Gaia, and like all of our life, it comes from earth. And so I've heard in other entities as well, they kind of have a sense that if we could be nudged into almost like a more Native American style of honoring the plants, honoring the animals, for even for hunters, you can honor the animal. It doesn't have to be in a cruel way. If we can change how we see things and how important life is, because for a lot of people, life is not precious. And I remember when I was in high school, it's almost like a popular thing to mock anything that's healthy or good. It's almost like if you're too cool for being compassionate or whatnot. And that's the opposite of what the other side and our guides and even God is encouraging us. And I love to get the word out that all these experiences are real. And like in his case, how you said that he was actually covered up and people they thought he was a goner. And that happens a lot with these experiences when the person wakes up and shocks everyone. And this happens and I'm surprised, and I think a lot of people are surprised. How come we don't hear it more often on the news? Why isn't it more known about? And that's a whole other topic because it's almost like you learn how in science or academia or the medical world, there are certain areas that are off limits. You can't talk about them. And so it's amazing because ultimately everyone dies, everyone returns into this a lot of experiences, they call it home. And we all will um, uh, review everything and see everything. And our actions here do matter. Even if you think that no one is watching, if you're hurting someone else or taking advantage of someone, it it does affect your soul.
Absolutely. All right, I want one more. I want one more NDE that just knocked your socks off for people.
Well, so my friend Andrew Bauer, have you talked to him? You
I
might have.
have not.
And so he's actually one of my moderators in the NDE group, and I think he's had several NDEs. And like a lot of people, uh, I always love when an experience it kind of helps the person to understand the bigger picture, including about why they signed up for their life. And in his case, in school, in his whole life, he had a lot of bullying, a lot of injuries, a lot of just like suffering. And I can't remember how or what initiated his first NDE, but in that, he had a life review of not just his current life, but his other uh, a few recent lifetimes. And he saw um, how those other lifetimes affected the reason why his current life was or is the way it is, including all that suffering and pain. And he saw that he was a businessman, and if I remember correctly, in New York City, in that area, like in the 1800s. And it was almost like Scrooge in terms of he was ultra stingy, ultra selfish at the expense of other people. And I think he was involved in business or the stock market or something, and he cheated. He kind of, he basically swindled other people out of money. And in terms of even bankrupting families or people who ended up, poor because of him. And so I forget how this all happened, but it was almost like in spirit when he talked to his guides and everything, um, and he reviewed all of that, and and he basically chose in this life an intentionally painful life to kind of atone for in his own way of like as a soul, I want to experience what that was like because I want to learn from it and grow out of it. Um, in this life, it has been really difficult for him. He has a lot of conditions and traumatic brain injuries, etc. Um, and his experiences have helped him to understand the reasons why, but also they have shown him into a bit into our future as humanity. And I've seen a bunch of other experiences which also have done this, where they talk about our possible futures. And
Mm-hmm.
he talks about how, like our current issues, you know how history, it tends to repeat itself if we don't learn. And so, but even like a spiral, sometimes it's two steps forward, one step back, and that whole process. And so um, it's almost like what is happening now is part of that. It's like we tend to be slow learners. The answer or the answer on our test is easy. It's love, but a lot of us have a hard time with that. And so it's just a matter of um, he says that eventually, when humanity overcomes three main things or hurdles, and it could be after a few hundred years, um, we will finally be more mature in terms of almost at the level of some other civilizations out there for ETs and whatnot. And I want to add, so if ETs sound far out, a lot of experiencers have talked to other ETs, other civilizations, and they are actually pretty common. And so
Yep, I agree. I agree.
and so if not, in a few hundred years, if we are at their level, well, at least we will be in a place or a level of maturity to actually work with them more. Because
Mhm.
right now, our military will often shoot them and attack them, and it's not a healthy dynamic. But anyway, he says that uh, money. He says that right now, our civilization, we have to use money. And in this whole thing, we have a lot of people who are really thriving and a lot of people who are struggling. And he says, eventually, just as everything has a purpose, and so money is an invention and it has a purpose compared to how we used to be, but there's a better way in the future, and it isn't about accumulating wealth. It's more about, helping each other towards common goals. And so he said the second main theme of advancement for humanity is to not be as individualistic. And so, yes, our personal freedoms are important. However, we can accomplish so much more if all of us are contributing into a common goal. And so, if you've heard of Anita Morjani,
Morjani?
yeah,
Yeah.
and her message in her NDE was always about how cooperation is so much better compared to competition. Like if we all cooperate and support each other, we can accomplish so much and so quickly. A lot of our problems on Earth is because of our own stalemates of just like holding each other back. If we just unleash that, we can really rise up. And then he said the The third thing he said is overcoming, I would say, religion or religious fairy tales. And I don't mean that, and he doesn't either, that all religion is bad, but there are a lot of dogmas or beliefs in religion which people fixate on, and it holds us back in terms of like not accepting certain people or treating each other, the believers versus the non-believers. He's like,
Yeah.
and all these experiences, they say we're all in this. It doesn't matter like what a person believes or not. Like we're all worthy of love. And actually, I just was reminded of another experiencer. His name is Rudy Rudenski, and he grew up in Texas. And he grew up during the Cold War, and he was raised in a strict Baptist church, and he was taught that a lot of people are basically evil or are beyond saving, including at that time it was the Russian communists were all evil, uh, Muslims were all evil, people of other orientations were evil, etc. So he had all this belief systems, and a lot of people are still in those. And he was in a car accident, a major accident, and he was like, I think his recovery process, it was extremely lengthy because of how many bones he broke. But in his experience, he met God or the higher power, and it told him firmly and yet lovingly how it loves everyone without exceptions, without any labels. It loves all. And so he came back, and now he helps other people who were uh, like him to kind of overcome their uh, dogma beliefs.
I love that. You reminded me of something when you first started sharing about the man who's the moderator on your
Andrew,
Facebook group. Yes. You mentioned life reviews, and you talked about his life review where he not only saw his own life, but lives, other lives, plural lives that he had lived before. And I wanted to add that when I started doing these interviews, one of the main things, the main reasons that I started this channel was because I was so completely touched and moved by life reviews, because it's that reminder that what we do to another, we literally, in the most like deepest sense of that, do it to ourselves, because we are one. And I feel like when people hear about a life review, it gives them a different perspective, and it makes them take pause and take inventory of their own lives. And if they really take that message in and that experience resonates, they affect how they act in the world, and the ripple effect that they send out after listening and hearing to these experiences is usually changed for the better. And it doesn't take very much of the collective to wake up and realize that we're one, and realize that every action that you have, every thought that you have affects the entire collective. And that's when we get into those three themes that your friend shared, where we can become more like these civilizations that are already advanced, because we will really and truly get it. And having a conversation like this and sharing all of these insights that we've learned are so valuable, because every perspective is unique and different. You never know in a conversation who you're going to touch.
That is extremely true. And I say that because how you mentioned the life review had an impression on you. And in terms of everything that I heard, uh, in reading about and hearing about people explain their life reviews, it was a major component in how, in changing how I saw things as well. And so it's incredible because bullies who come back and they're like, I don't want to hurt a fly anymore,
Right.
And so, because and I studied world religions. I studied the Eastern religions and Western religions because I wanted to understand, is there anything that is of true value here? And a lot of them, have some level of that, the concept of the golden rule. All of them have that. And, perhaps, the old me, I thought, well, it's just a nice idea. Like it's just, how they say religion is the opiate of the masses. Well, if you hear it, perhaps, it just sounds nice. But when you talk to people who died and come back, they say it isn't just a nice idea, it's how reality works. And so, whatever we put out there, and if we step on others, we're going to have to experience that happening to us, and often they talk about how, like, in that process, emotions are even stronger, like our feelings, our senses are stronger. And so, the moral of the story is love. And as if everyone else is you or part of you or a brother or sister, and yeah, and that's also something that I think about a lot because, it's a lot of experiencers will say that they learn the little things are the big things. And so, you can accomplish a lot if you have a passion, but actually what's also or more important is how you treat the person at the counter or on the road or your spouse if you're angry and you're more thoughtful, like, okay, I could react how I've always reacted, or I could be more thoughtful about it.
Exactly. Well, Ned, I would imagine that people who are watching are like, where's this Facebook group? How can I be a part of this? And how do they find this group?
And so on Facebook, if you search near-death experiences, and you'll probably see a whole bunch, but in mine it has a picture of the cosmos, and so it's almost 300,000 members at the moment. And also you can just enter it in if you go to facebook.com/groups/return from death.
Okay. Ned, I feel so lucky to be connected to you at IANDS. The universe absolutely conspired to bring us together so we could have this amazing conversation about what we've learned and just to share things that have touched us in this NDE community. And I want to thank you so much. Thank you for what you are doing to wake up the collective. It is so needed and the work is so important. And thank you for bringing together this fabulous community so that people could learn and connect.
You're welcome.
And of course, this show is nothing without all of you who tune in to watch, listen, comment, share. I so appreciate you, and thank you everybody for watching. I'm Laurie Majka. If you like stories that open your heart and expand your soul, hit subscribe. This channel is Waking Up the Collective.